What do you make of what Stormy Daniels had to say?
She was incredibly vivid in detail. And maybe some people think that that is a convenient truth for her. But from what she said and what she relayed to the jury that sat and rapt attention and took detailed notes in their notebooks, Stormy Daniels delivered for the prosecution, namely that she experienced a brief sexual encounter with Donald Trump that was not being presented for the purposes of the salaciousness of what happened, but because at the end of the day, immediately after it occurred, Donald Trump never told her to keep it confidential. He never told her that he was worried that his family or his wife Melania would find out. Instead, it was only after he announced that he was going to run for the office of the President of the United States that suddenly there was a mad dash to get her across the finish line with a non-disclosure agreement with a payment of $130,000. Now, it'll be up to the prosecution in the end to present it in closing in terms of weaving it all together. But the jury definitely was interested in hearing what she had to say. And so far, she's been holding her own against a very aggressive cross-examination by the only female lawyer for Donald Trump.
Barb, if you're the prosecutor here, how are you feeling about Stormy's testimony thus far?
Oh, I think it came in really well. One of the things Katie mentioned there was the level of detail in her story. And I think that's important. There were some objections raised about some of the salacious details that came in today. But things like the black and white tile on the floor and the mahogany furniture and the layout of the hotel room, these things matter only because if she is fabricating that, it would be very easy to rebut that. They could have a witness who works at that hotel say it doesn't look anything like that, or it didn't look anything like that in 2006. And so those kinds of details, I think, can really bolster her testimony and help a jury believe that this story is true. I think one thing that the prosecution has to be careful about, though, is something I've encountered in cases I've handled, and it reminds me of when Kenneth Starr was investigating Bill Clinton. I think that if the details of the sexual affair become too salacious, there's a worry that the jury perceives the case to be about morality instead of about what the case is really about, which is the falsification of business records to interfere with an election. And so I think they got just enough detail to tell the story here. She's now off on cross-examination, so far holding up well, but we'll continue that tomorrow.
I want to go back to the salaciousness in a sec, Barb, but Susan, let's just zoom out, okay? It was January 2018. Just 1 year into Trump's presidency, okay? We've been hearing about Stormy Daniels for 6 long years now, and here we are. Put this case and specifically this testimony into context for us.
Well, that's right. There are two very, very different audiences for all of this. And one is what happened inside that courtroom and with the jury itself and the judge. But of course, the context here is this national election. And, in a way, it sums up 2024 just in brief, that we are not only having this very belated court proceeding. I mean, that's one story about Donald Trump, is that he's managed to play the legal system so that it's taken so long that we're in the middle of yet another election year talking about whether he was essentially improperly intervening in the 2016 election. That's 8 years ago. So I'm struck by the amount of time we've been talking about this, but also about the incredibly surreal nature. Whatever the jury ultimately makes of these charges against Donald Trump, we are talking about an account of a woman under oath that is extraordinarily problematic. If the politician's name was not Donald Trump, it's hard to see how this is something that would lend luster to the Republican nominee for president of the United States. And that, of course, is the other audience. What does the public make of this? Do they simply shrug their shoulders and say, we already know this about Donald Trump and we don't care? For those who are his fans or who are Republican partisans and want him to win anyways, that really is in essence the question that we're being asked every day this year in 2024.
Katie, let's dig back into, dare I say, the dirty details that Barb was just referencing. Stormy went into graphic detail, right? The judge actually said, keep it brief, don't give us the details. She did. She gave us the details. They certainly do not show Trump in a good light. But is there a risk that this gets the case sidetracked? Could it backfire on the prosecution?
Well, that's a really good question, right? Because it's such a stark contrast to what yesterday was like. Yesterday was Jeff McConney and Deborah Tarasoff, people that are former employees or an employee currently at Trump Organization, creating and documenting that paper trail of the receipts and the fake ledgers and the false invoices and the wrong retainer entries, et cetera. So you get that and you juxtapose it to what we heard today with Stormy Daniels, and your eyes obviously get very wide. But here's the kind of true issue, which is the evidence, right? Because, you know, Steph, we could have conversations all day long, but what the jury ends up hearing is totally different. The jury can only see, read, hear, feel what has actually been entered into evidence. What is said by a lawyer is not evidence. And so what happened today is, despite the detour into the more lurid and more salacious details of what happened with Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels, when the defense failed to object, that's why the jury heard it. And so despite the move for a mistrial during the direct examination testimony of Stormy Daniels, Judge Merchan said to the defense, you know, I honestly expected you to object more. And so despite there being, quote, guardrails that were put up to make sure that Stormy Daniels didn't veer too far off the beaten path, because the defense failed to object, and even when Judge Merchan said you might want to make sure that you stay on the straight and narrow, the jury ended up hearing it anyways. And so they left today with a recess for no court tomorrow on Wednesday, with that very kind of seared into their minds images, of what Stormy Daniels said happened with Donald Trump.
Barb, let's talk about the cross-examination. Trump's lawyers are clearly trying to paint the picture that Stormy is out to get Trump. She has a vendetta against him. Even if she does, if the facts are on her side, does it matter?
Yeah, it really doesn't. I think there are two ways to look at that. One is that, you know, she was even asked, don't you hate Donald Trump, don't you? And she said, yes, I do. And if that's the case, there's nothing that undermines her credibility in that way. That if that's the way she feels, then that's fine. If she was out to get him, if she was at one point she was accused of extorting him, which she denied. But even if the jury believes that to be the case, I don't think that's problematic here, because at the end of the day, she says she took the payment that Donald Trump paid her through Michael Cohen. I think the second reason that they're using this, though, is to impeach her as a witness, her believability, that she'll say anything, that because of her feelings for Donald Trump, because she so despises him, she is here, she's out to get him, she does have a vendetta against him, and therefore you should not believe anything that she has to say. But of course, the way that prosecutors address that sort of situation is by corroborating her testimony with the testimony from other people. And so I think that, again, with the display of all of the details here, if someone wanted to undermine her credibility, they could simply bring in a witness to refute some of those details. It remains to be seen in their case whether they're able to do that or not. But I don't know that just because a jury might not like her doesn't mean they won't believe her.
Susan, today we heard so many embarrassing details, and according to the transcript, Donald Trump could not control himself in the courtroom. The judge actually had to tell Trump's attorney to calm his client because he was actually cursing audibly in a way that could potentially intimidate witnesses. How lucky is Donald Trump, right? Lucky example, 4,682. How lucky is this man that there are no cameras in the courtroom?
Well, it would have been must-see TV. There's no question about that, Steph. You know, and in general, that's one of the things that's really interesting about this case. I wonder if it really has captivated the public's attention. Certainly, it's given new life to the entire industry of courtroom sketching, you know, which has never had more high-profile role in our national public life, so at least certainly not in decades that I can remember. It's a reminder that that courtrooms and the judicial system are among the least transparent and most opaque parts of our system of government. But, you know, on some level, it is a good news for Donald Trump that the whole country isn't seeing this live on video. But of course, his fate is tied up here nonetheless, right? This judge has the power to send him to jail if he continues to rack up these contempt of court citations. He clearly was risking another one in the courtroom today with the cursing audibly. You used that quote. That's a quote apparently from the transcript itself. It's pretty remarkable stuff. But I do wonder whether the country is really fully absorbing this because it's not right there on video and on television for them. They're not used to things, frankly, anymore that aren't live streamed and instantly available to them anymore.
Barb, a miserable day in court for Trump, but a bright and sunny day for him in Florida. His classified documents case. Today, his favorite judge in the whole wide world, Aileen Cannon, indefinitely postponed the trial down there, granted him a delay, the one that he wanted on a key paperwork deadline. I mean, what is going on here? Can Jack Smith appeal? It is like Trump always says, like, there's a two-tiered system, the courts are biased against him, or they're controlling the Department of Justice. If there's any bias, if there's anything political, it's Aileen Cannon hooking this guy up every which way.
Yeah, I never want to impute bad faith to any judge based on the decisions that they're making, but this one is really very difficult to figure, in part because she hasn't really explained why she has extended all of these deadlines so consistently. And now, as you say, not just moving the trial date, but suspending it indefinitely. She cites, as she is required to, the Speedy Trial Act and explains why she is tolling that, because, of course, it is not just the defendant's right to a speedy trial, but the public also has a right to a speedy trial. But what she says is that the fair administration of justice requires that this be delayed indefinitely in light of the complexity of the issues and all of the pending motions and decisions that she has to make about the use of classified information. And therefore, the date can't be set until all of that gets worked through. But it really does seem that this has been a slow walk of this case. This is a case that is not that difficult. It has a finite number of exhibits, a finite number of witnesses. I really would have expected this case to have been tried to verdict by now. And instead, it is on a slow track and now appears that it will not be tried before the election.